Welcome back to the Right Wave Audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we are continuing our Right Wave Audio series in Home Theater Amplifiers in 2022, and this time it's with Rotel. And this series all began with the Monolith by Monoprice amplifiers, followed by Emotiva, ToneWinner, IOTAVX, Outlaw Audio, ATI Amplifier Technologies, OSD, NAD, Marantz, Yamaha, Onkyo Integra, and now Rotel as the 12th in this series. And if you want to see the whole series, we do have a playlist of these, so you could watch these one after the other if you choose, or just find your favorites. But anyhow, let's take a look at the Rotel series here, and they do have quite a bit of amplifiers to choose from. They range from 2-channel models to 5-channel models, and their prices are from $1,400 up to $3,700. And these models have been out for a little bit. We're going to take a look at these from the entry-level on up. And the first one that we bring to the table is the RB-1552 Mark II. Now, this is the second iteration of this, but this Mark II was introduced in 2014. So we've been out with this model for about 8 years. This is a unit that has balanced and unbalanced inputs. This gives you 2 channels at 130 watts, has a removable power cord. What Rotel is doing with a lot of their 2-channel models is giving you 2 sets of binding posts for each channel. So if you want to do bi-wiring, that is good. But there is not the capability of doing a bridged mono or a bi-amplification, if you will. This is just a second set for bi-wiring. So don't get confused by the extra set of terminals. And this isn't like A/B speakers that you can switch between here. The unit is available also in a silver finish, which is attractive but may not be desirable for some home theater environments, but we happen to like it. The only button on the front of these is a power button with a blue halo around it when it is powered on. Other than that, there is no meters, but you do get this venting that's in the front as well as in the rear. Looking inside of the Rotel unit, you can see that all of these use a toroidal power supply, and the Rotel website does show a collection of capacitors and resistors and transistors on their page. We come to question if these are exact matches for the components used in each of these. Notice that they're showing 2 types of capacitors there, where clearly only one type is used in this particular model. So just be cautious of that. I think they're just saying this is emblematical of the types of components, the quality of components that go into these models, but not necessarily exact matches for that particular model on that page. Otherwise, the layouts of the Rotel units are very clean. Not a lot of wiring in here, all kind of laid out nicely on a printed circuit board with the heat sinks flanking each side of this and the power supply in the center. So I do think this is a well-built unit. Looking on to the next model, the RB-1582 Mark II, also introduced in 2014, sells for $1,899. This also is a 2-channel model with balanced and unbalanced connections. This one gives you a higher output rating of 200 watts per channel into those 2 channels. It also has the additional set of binding posts used in the same way, and also available in silver, as you'll see for all these models. In fact, this seems to share the exact same chassis as the preceding model. Looking inside the 1582, we can see that they do up the game for the additional price here. So, and also to get the additional output at 200 watts versus 130. Larger capacitors, etc. I mean, look at that network of wiring on the capacitors. That looks pretty impressive there. You can't quite see the toroidal power supply behind that mesh metal plate, but that is what is behind it. And again, the sampling of capacitors and components that go inside is actually the same picture we see in the 1552 model webpage. So again, another trigger for why we're thinking that that's not necessarily exact matches in each case. The RB-1590, which is the flagship 2-channel model that Rotel has here, and this sells for a much higher price at $3,699. This was introduced a year later in 2015, but this gives you 350 watts per channel for 8 ohm loads times 2 here, giving you the balanced and unbalanced input connections, also giving you the additional set of binding posts for the 2 channels. So very similar to that, but this is a much larger chassis than the other 2 models. Again, available in silver, if that's your preference. Looking inside the 1590, again, it is a step up in the quality and the circuitry, but the layout does show a consistency in the the design language. You can probably sense that the similar engineer or engineering teams are developing these, making sure that there's at least consistency of how they go about the layout, but then upping the game in the components that are being used. In this case, the picture they give of the components is a little different than the preceding 2 models there as well. So this is the 1590. Looking now to the multi-channel amplifiers, and they have 2 models here. The RMB-1555 is their entry-level 5-channel model. This was introduced in 2013 and sells for $2,099. So we're not seeing new models from Rotel. Of course, amplifier technology does not change that rapidly unless you were dealing with a Class D amplifier, and this is not. These are all Class AB. This 5-channel amplifier is putting out 120 watts into the 2 channels it can deliver. Here we do not have the extra set of binding posts as we see in the 2-channel models. This is 5-channel sets of binding posts and inputs, but please note this is the only Rotel model that only provides for unbalanced input connections. There are no balanced connections on the 1555. And we'll quickly show you that this is also available in silver finish. Inside the 1555, the same attention to board layout and quality. Of course, given all the extra channels, there's a little more wiring for a 5-channel unit, but lots of heat sinks in this, again using the toroidal power supply. And finally, the RMB-1585, so this is the flagship of their multi-channel amplifiers, also introduced in 2013 and sells for $3,699. So 5 channels once again, but this is delivering those 5 channels at 200 watts per channel, all channels driven. And Rotel does note in their manuals that they feel it's important to measure all channels driven, and that's how they rate their amplifiers. And thank you for doing that. That's what we like to see, and thanks for calling attention to that in your manuals, that is important. It does speak to the fact that Rotel does care about the measurements and the quality of the devices that they put out, so you can trust really what these ratings are. it does appear that there might be an additional foot, as I can see in the picture here, that there seems to be a foot in the center. It's either using 3 or 5 feet on the bottom of the Rotel. So if anybody knows what's on the bottom, is it 3 feet or 5? But there is one clearly placed in the center here on this model. When we look at the back of this, we can see that there is 2 fans flanking the left and the right here. Probably come on when needed. If it's sensing high temperatures, it will turn those on, is our guess. So on this model, we do have back the balanced connections as an option to the unbalanced. Single set of binding posts for each speaker output for the 5 speaker outputs. And so that is this model, of course, available in silver for your preference. And then looking inside the 1585, this does seem to resemble the RB-1590 to some degree as far as some of the power supply sections are probably copied in here. But of course it has to accommodate the 5 channels versus 2, so there's a little difference, of course, to handle all those extra channels. Now our typical side-by-side comparison, and we've chosen to show the side-by-side with the silver finish, but this could have just as well have been the black finish. But you can see the variance in height, so there's appears to be 1, 2, 3 different sizes here. I think the 1590 and the RB-1585 is the same size, but the same height. I think the RB-1585 is the same height as the 1590, and the 1552 and the 1582 are the same height, where the 1555 is uniquely positioned between the two. Looking at the backs of these, again, it shows the consistency in which these things are laid out in design. Of course, the 1585 appears to be the only one that has the fans inside of it. And then looking at the top-down view of the interior, these are just all well-built amplifiers and using good quality components and capacitors. Now on to the specifications. So they're all using balanced and unbalanced connections, as we said, except for the 1555, which is unbalanced only. Their convention seems to be, if you have unbalanced connections, the input impedance is 12 kilo ohms, and for their balanced inputs, they have an input impedance of 100 kilo ohms. The triggers are available for both input and output, which is what we like to see. So you can daisy chain amplifiers with one single trigger output from your processor or receiver that is hosting these. The input sensitivity into 8 ohms vary between balanced and unbalanced connections. So the 1552 for unbalanced is 1.5 volts, 2.5 for balance. The 1582 is 1.9 volts for unbalanced, 3 volts for balanced. The 1590 is 2.2 volts unbalanced, 3.5 volts balanced. The 1555 is only unbalanced and the sensitivity is 1.5 volts. And finally, the 1585 is 1.9 volts unbalanced, 3.8 volts balanced. The cost per channel here, the most economical is, of course, the 1555, $420 per channel for the 5 channels that it has internally here. And this ramps up. The next one up is the 1552 at $700 per channel. The 1585 multi-channel is at $740, so this is probably a very good value for the quality of amplifier it is, under $1,000 per channel. Then the 2-channel models of the 1582 at $950 a channel, and the 1590 is the most expensive per channel at $1,850. All class AB, as we said before. Gains vary, but they're just generally around the 26.5 decibel level of gains. The balance connection is slightly less for the 2-channel models, coming in around 22 to 23.5 decibels. The loads it supports are between 4 and 8 ohm impedance. In the output, we see that the 1552 and the 1555 are close. They're around 130, 120 watts per channel. All channels driven for all these ratings. The 1582 and the multi-channel 1585 are both 200 watts per channel, all channels driven. And then the 1590 gives you the most output into 8 ohm loads at 350 watts. I'm a little surprised that Rotel, although supporting 4 ohm loads, does not provide a 4 ohm measurement in their literature. I'm assuming that that's pretty favorable, so that would have been nice to see. These are all measured at full range, 20 to 20,000 hertz, and 0.03% total harmonic distortion. Again, speaking to Rotel trying to be honest about their measurements. Signal to noise ratio is done A-weighted between 116 decibels and 120, depending on the model. So the models giving you 120 are the 1552 Mark II and the 1590. There is no support for bridged amplification in these models. And finally, the dimensions and power specifications and a few other miscellaneous things here. As said before, there's some consistency in the chassis. The slimmest unit is 5.9 inches in height, or 144 millimeters. The tallest units are the 1590 and the 1585 that come in at 9.4 inches in height and 237 millimeters for the metric measurement there. The 1555 is in between at 7.5 inches, 188 millimeters. They're all 17 inches wide, 431 millimeters. The depth varies from 13.4 inches, 339 millimeters, all the way up to the 3 larger units that give you a depth of 17.9 inches or 454 millimeters. Weight varies as we go up in price, we go up in weight. So the 1552 is the lightest at 27.3 pounds, 12.4 kilograms, and this works its way all up to the 1590, which is the heaviest, despite only being 2 channels versus 5, at 84 pounds, 38.1 kilograms. They all have removable IEC power cords. They all have options when you buy them to either get a 120 volt version or a 240 volt version, but this is based off of where you're buying it from. So you want to check that if you are concerned about input voltage. They all use toroidal power supplies, which is a nice linear power supply option we like to see. Consumption ranges from 400 watts to 1100 watts, and so the multi-channel units use more for their respective output rating. The 1590 still uses a lot at 800 watts there. They don't show the capacitance for each of these models. The 1582 Mark II has 60,000 microfarads. I did find an article or another retailer that suggests that the 8 capacitors in the 1585 5-channel model is 120,000 microfarads. That is actually believable value. We're guessing at some of the others why have it kind of ghosted out based off of the rating on the side of the capacitors and the number of capacitors in there. So I'll just leave it on the screen there. They may not be right. We only get a crosstalk rating on the 1552 for 50 decibels. Damping factor is supplied for each model. So these range from 180 decibels in the 1555 up to 800 decibels in the 1582, and then the others fall in between. Again, the only unit that has fans is the 5-channel 1558. So that wraps it up for Rotel. What are your thoughts? It's nice to see a good, strong amplifier line from a company that also focuses on processors and receivers, or as they call it, an amplified processor, not a receiver. Effectively the same thing. A little marketing on their part. But what do you think of Rotel and their approach to amplifiers and what they're doing now? They haven't updated, they haven't moved over to Class D or anything. These have been out there for at least 8 years in some cases. So thoughts there that would be appreciated in the comments. If you want to support this channel further, please consider being a Patreon at www.patreon.com/ripewave. We would appreciate anybody that would like to become a member there. For the additional content, you get access to the Ripewave audio database and be able to go through that spreadsheet and help you with your selections even further and do those comparative analysis. Plus, all the slides are available to you, all our infographics, when you become a Patreon member. So thank you for your support regardless. If you enjoy this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. That helps us very much as well. Be sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.